questions we were going to catch up on were around conveyancing and solicitor stuff and legal stuff. And I think for clients, a lot of time it can all sound a bit kind of muffled in the head of right. Well, you got your legal person doing this, solicitor doing that, conveyancing doing this, and I think for me, I've just made a note of some frequently asked questions I often get, and I think we'll just kind of take them one by one. First question often I get is, why is having a solid solicitor so important? Surely a solicitor is a solicitor. Of course, we can go down the road of saying, well, surely a plumber is just a plumber. We know where that ends up if anyone's ever had a plumber out. But if you were to get that question from a client, what's the importance of having a solid solicitor? What would you say to that?
Yeah, it is a really common question. I think the more common question is, client thinks conveyancing is conveyancing, and it really isn't. But the point about the solicitor one's really important. So a solicitor practices normally across a number of areas when they're training, and they will choose one specific area to focus on, but will also have to be, they'd have to go out to different areas. So if you're in a multi-service law firm, that's quite easy. You might spend 3 months with family, 3 months with private clients, commercial, and maybe some type of property. With a firm that specializes in property, if they choose to go down a route where they want to train their own solicitors, they would have to ship those solicitors out to other firms to get them exposure to other areas of law. So a solicitor will have varied experience in different areas of law. If you sort of remember back a few decades, maybe, your one-man band or smaller law firms that were on your high street, that was probably where you went, where your family went for everything.
Yeah,
and
your
they
local
are
solicitor.
Yeah, they are still about, worryingly still about. So the problem with conveyancing is, out of all the different areas of law, conveyancing carries the smallest fee. So the typical fee in conveyancing can be somewhere between, say, 1,000 and 2,500, something like that. Well, your typical family deal is probably 15, 20, 30,000, or your corporate deal is hundreds of thousands. So if you are either a one-man band or a multi-service firm, the profit, the money, the effort, technology, all the investment is normally given to developing the areas that make you the most money. And then on the other side of that, you've got the risk. And the risk in, say, family law might be quite low. The claims are low for sure. The amount that people would claim for might also be quite low. If somebody gets something really wrong, it might be a small proportion of their fee they've got to give back. In conveyancing, you can get sued for the full amount of property value. So the risk is sky high. If somebody's a property firm transacting on property values in the millions, that's a very, very high risk firm. And you've only got to look at the amount of insurers in the market to realise that. There are only 4 insurers insuring conveyancing. Tiny. And they've got the monopoly, so they can charge what they like.
Sure, they do.
And they do. So a conveyancer or solicitor has a situation where they look at conveyancing and think, this is going to cost me a lot to run the business, it's high risk, and the fees are very low. So, what am I going to do? And what most of them decide to do is just service their existing client base. And they dabble, and that's probably the worst thing to do. So you might have a family lawyer that you had a relationship with for 600 years, and they've done your wills, and they've sorted out a few bits for you on your business and everything else. But when it comes to buying your house, going back to them is probably the worst mistake you can make, because they won't give it the time it needs. They won't have the expertise that's probably needed. And unfortunately and sadly, because their attention is diverted elsewhere, they're most likely to be doing other things over and above prioritizing your case. Now, I know you might be a very important client and everything else, and the relationship's very valuable, but they don't want to be doing it. They really don't. And we get situations all the time. So we're not a large firm. We call ourselves niche, but we're sort of just inside top 100 in the country. So we're coming up across solicitors on the other side from all over the country, and we see different ways in which they work. And I'm not exaggerating. Most of them will say, oh, half day on a Friday, don't work. Or I'm playing golf, I can't come back to you. On the holiday for 2 weeks. So you will not get a response from me for 2 weeks. You cannot run a property transaction like that. Blows my mind. Christmas, 2 weeks off. Why not? And it's them and an assistant. And we'll ask for an update and they'll say, well, it's in dictation. So they're speaking still into a device with all their notes, and they give it to a secretary who listens and types it up and then sends it to us in the post. This is not the way that we should be transacting property in the UK in 2024, but really common. There are circa 20,000 conveyancers in the UK. And the reason there are so many is because a couple of the big factories are taking up the majority of the market share, but the thousands of one-man bands and tiny conveyancing practices in multi-service law firms are clinging on to serve their existing client base. And if they want to close, they can't really afford it because they've got to carry on paying PI for 6 years after they shut, and that's a lot of money. So they're dabbling really just to keep going. And that's really damaging our industry, both from a reputational standpoint, but also from a service point of view, because the transactions are taking so much longer. So as a client considering who to use, the best advice that I could give, knowing this industry for 20 years, is go with somebody who specializes in this stuff, not somebody who's dabbling, because that will just take you twice as long probably, which is hard to say, because obviously if you've got a chain of 3 or 4, you might have 2 really good lawyers in that chain. You might have 2 that aren't. And sadly, the transaction's only moving as quickly as the slowest lawyer in the chain. So we need everybody to do this to make a serious dent. The average time it takes to buy a property in the UK, and I say UK, I mean England and Wales, because the Scottish process is different and much better.
Yep.
It's about 139 days as of today is the average. From memorandum of sale to exchange of contracts. That is ridiculous. 10 years ago, it was about 8-9 weeks. So we need to work together to make sure that this gets into a manageable situation where people can actually buy a house in a reasonable timescale. And this, sadly, is one of the problems.
And do you feel there's anything from a technology point of view that is coming or could come along that could speed that process up? Because we're all hearing about AI and how AI is going to change everything. And obviously there's good outcomes of that and bad outcomes depending on your point of view potentially. But is there anything that you're seeing right now coming through or that should come through that would make the industry from a conveyancing point of view more streamlined, whether that's AI chatbots, which I'm not really sure is the best way to do it, all the way through to things like blockchain, which can potentially be used in this type of application?
Blockchain's the dream. If we got to a place where every property had its own digital passport and it could be traded on the block as a block, game changer.
Yeah.
That, I think I'll be long retired by the time that comes about, but would love to see it happen and would love to be a part of it. We can't deny the fact that technology will transform our industry. We're very late to it. I think your industry and on the mortgage and lender side is a lot further progressed. Estate agents are some estate agents are probably further behind us. I like AI, really like it. I think we're close. So if you can, the trouble we have is we've got really historic documents that we need to read. So some of the leases are hundreds of years old. Some of the ground rent is still bring me a bottle of whiskey on this date every year, and it has to be a certain bottle of whiskey. Good.
Doesn't sound too bad.
Or Red Rose or something. This is still a thing where these leases haven't been buried or changed over the time. So it's a big task to get AI to a place where it understands all these documents and can interpret them and then report to a client in a way a lawyer would. I think it is going to take some time, but we're not far away. We can do the basic stuff, which is great. It doesn't replace the lawyer, because what a lawyer needs to do at that point, and where I think they really add value, is to provide context. So the AI extrapolates the data that is important, embedded in the lease or the title or whatever, portrays it to the client in the form of a report. And if the lawyers just saved a load of time, what's stopping them picking up the telephone and saying, these are the main points that you need to be aware of. This is what it actually means to you. Because if you take an environmental report to say that your property is going to be underwater in 100 years, or the way coastal erosion is going and seawaters are rising and everything else, it might say that. But it's not necessarily a cause for concern right now for you or the mortgage lender to buy that property, because is it going to happen in your lifetime? Maybe not. So I think a lawyer's job will be more important than ever, but also more personal than ever, which is what people want, actually. And that's what we've come away from over the years. We've been absolutely obsessed as a country, as a nation, as a world, for taking away that personal touch. I think AI brings that back for us. It takes out the admin, but it brings back the expertise. And I think professional services now, it isn't going to be replaced. I think it will get stronger. And you can see that actually in your world, can't you? Because 15 years ago, everybody went to their bank for a mortgage.
Totally.
And what the banks have done, rightly or wrongly, for their business model, is they've replaced the people with the robots. And now all the banking's done on the app, and all the appointments are done 3 weeks' time via FaceTime or whatever. And they've said, we have a solution for this. We have a tech solution for this. Well, actually, what brokers are doing is saying, well, we've got similar tech, but actually, I'm going to look after you as a person, as a human being. And that's what people want. And that's why the vast majority of clients now have a broker, as well as all the financial benefits and everything else. So I think there is a lot of technology out there at the moment which helps. ID is a great example. So 10 years ago, it took us 3 weeks to complete identification checks. You had to meet people face to face. They brought in the wrong documents. They went home, got the right documents, did it again. It was ridiculous. Now it's all on the app. It's done within 20 minutes. That's really, really helpful. But the key issue is that you get these tech firms coming into our industry saying, we have a solution for you as a whole. That doesn't exist. You might have a solution for 10 firms or 20 firms or 30 firms. But as I said earlier, there are thousands of firms. How do you capture all of those when it's going to cost you money as a firm to integrate with these tech businesses? They won't do it. They just won't pay it. Your one-man band will not pay it. Your dying conveyancing department in a multi-service law firm will not pay it. So that's where property-specific firms who are tech-focused and innovative will grow and do really well. But we will never solve the entire problem until it all gravitates to firms like that. That's the sad reality, I think.
Okay. And just, I guess, coming back to your earlier point around not going to a firm that's just dabbling in it and a firm that does it properly. From a consumer's point of view, if you're rightfully or wrongly, when you think about some of these comparison websites, which are all about price, never about service or criteria or eligibility, it's all just about price. And, that's not an indicator of whether you can get something. It's just merely just ordering them in a price list. If you think of an average consumer, they go on to a comparison website, they have a list of conveyances there, and whether you like it or not, most of the time the system will just order them in the priority of price. What would you say to someone who's like looking at a cheaper cheaper solicitor, and then someone who's more personable, more experienced, has those better reviews? Because often with the cheaper ones, you don't necessarily see the good reviews. What would you say to them in terms of their decision making, and again, just why that cheaper option is just more often than not just not the best route to go down from a conveyancing point of view in a property transaction?
Yeah, I think probably the most important question we'll talk about today, to be honest. The the landscape is just dominated by big conveyancing factories. They're buying up the first 4 pages of Google, and nobody goes to page 5, do they? That's the problem. So if you're Googling fantastic conveyancers in my area, that's really terrible Google, sorry.
Yeah.
Great
Can you run my
conveyancers in my
analytics for that?
area, efficient conveyancers in my area, they will dominate the first 4 pages of Google.
Yeah.
Cost them a lot of money to do so. They are a race to the bottom, and price is an important thing for the consumer. The consumer typically wants 3 things in terms of importance of priority. 1 is price, 2 is speed, and 3 is service. I think what a client needs to be aware of is that if you go for price, you compromise the other 2 massively.
Totally agree with that.
But I'm happy to give some context around why that is. So the business model that they have, because they feel that their B2C, business to client marketing strategy is pump a load of money into Google. The client finds us online, our website, user experience is okay, normally pretty good. But to get further up the page, we need to be the cheapest. They have to cut costs in other areas. And the way they've done that is normally through staff and the amount of work they take on. So what they have decided to do from a staffing perspective is think, legally, you do not need a lawyer to act for you when you buy a property. You can do it yourself. I would never, ever endorse that. But legally, you can.
Yep.
So what they've decided to do is employ a lot of admin staff, typically on minimum wage, and it keeps their costs low. So if you're buying your house and this is the most important thing to you and you're going to live there for 20 years, I think you should want it done properly. The problem with these admin staff is they normally, and I know this because I've been to look around some of these firms, they have a 6 to 8 week training program. So you imagine you've got somebody, and I'm sure, perfectly intelligent enough. You get bought into the firm as whatever your work experience was. I don't know, say you were in retail previously, and you think, oh, I'd love a career in law. Let's go for one of the property law outfits. And they start on day 1. They will go on a 6 to 8 week, what they call academy, and they'll be taught everything they need to know about conveyancing. And on day 1, after week 8, they get given a caseload. Now that caseload is far bigger than we would give one of our experienced solicitors of 20 years. And every single transaction, regardless of how vanilla it looks to an estate agent or how vanilla it looks to a potential buyer, every single property transaction is different. Every single client is different. And as I said earlier, after 2 decades of doing this, I still get calls about situations where I don't know the answer. And that's the most amazing thing about this industry. And that's what I love about it. It keeps me interested because I'm learning every day. And I've done the finance side, the law side, and the agency side, and there's still lots I don't know. So how are you going to expect these guys to know what to do after 8 weeks? They can't even learn the surface of it. But that's the reality. They're lumbered with a large caseload on week 1. That caseload, as I said earlier, will probably be on their desk for 130 odd days, probably more. But what these firms do after 8 weeks is they say, right, should have completed now, we'll discount it. So it's not in their figures of their caseload anymore. It's over 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever their internal procedures are. So if you've got a case that drags on, it's not in the figures. You've got to do that as well as everything else. So you get another caseload, say 100, 200 new matters. Suddenly they're running cases of 500 strong. The business is only managing their performance on 200. Well, what happens? They can't answer the phone to you. They can't be proactive. They can't be quick. They can't chase the other side. And what happens is they get something complicated. They've got lawyers in the firm, but that lawyer providing technical advice is probably providing technical advice to 50 people. So when I came back to the original point, which was, if you choose price, my advice to you is you will invest a lot of your own time because you'll need to be chasing them. It will be really stressful. And you're gambling on whether they do it correctly or not. The reason there's only 4 insurance providers in the conveyancing market is because these big firms get sued so often because they get it wrong. So insurance dropped out the market because they said it's too high risk for us because so many conveyancers are not doing it properly. So I cannot say strongly enough, get a solicitor who does this as a full-time job, who is experienced and knows what they're doing, has a good team to back them up so that it's not all on them. So it's no good saying, this is my solicitor for the full 12 weeks. It will never happen. They will have a day off. They will be sick. They will have a holiday. They need a good team. And for that, you pay a bit more money. What blows my mind is that stamp duty is extortionate. So the amount of people that pay 10, 20, 50, 100 grand on stamp duty and then want to save money on lawyers' fees, that doesn't feel right. You know, if you can get a lawyer for a couple of thousand, it is worth its weight in gold rather than 800 quid for a faceless firm that is going to try their best, but the business model just isn't there for that, to provide any type of service that matches somebody who's specializing in it and being very sensibly commercial. Yeah, sensibly commercial, I suppose is the right word. You have to, we're a service industry, you have to provide some level of service and it has to be personal. If you've got a question, which you inevitably will throughout the process, you want to be able to pick up the phone to your lawyer, hopefully on their mobile number, and ask them. And you don't want to be waiting for 5 days for them to come back to you because you need to be able to move quickly. And this is not just based at, aimed at buyers, by the way. If you're selling your property, it's equally as important because your buyer will be putting pressure on you then to be quick. And if you can't, then you might lose your buyer. And the amount of fall throughs in this country is over 20% of them. And that's, you know, again, far too high. So the solution is do your research. Price is, of course, important, but compare pricing if you want to compare pricing on like for like. And the way conveyancers quote is very different. So you could go to 100 conveyancers, they quote in different ways. Make sure that you've considered the full picture because some people put a really cheap headline price and then charge you lots of extras at the end. So you want to make sure the quote you have is what you're going to be billed at the end.
No, I think that's really valuable, Chris, and it encapsulates, you know, the journey that I see clients go through, you know, for all the years that I've been in the industry. You know, that value piece of price is very important. Of course it is, but you know, you've got to have that speed, you've got to have that service, and I think it links into what you say there around the, and again, we won't finger point, but the typical maybe employee who has maybe just come out of uni, or like you say, they've just come from a completely different background. They've just done their 8 weeks training, and that's it. They're out there. I think, you know, just basically on a human level, which is understandable, and you kind of almost sympathize with them. You wouldn't be sympathizing with them when it's your transaction, nor should you. But you sympathize with them, I guess, from looking at it externally, because you know, I often find that, you know, those individuals, they're so overworked, they don't have the time to pick up the phone, don't have the time to respond to emails, and because of that workload or lack of knowledge, and I guess people sometimes hide behind the emails, and you know, God forbid, if you're in a system where, you know, we've got a 6-7 SLA turnaround for emails, you know, you send an email saying, I'm not happy with this, can we do this? 7 days later, you get a response back going, okay, you know, this, and then you're responding 7 days later. You know, you can have, you know, what could have been done in 30 seconds on the phone takes a month, you know, in terms of waiting times on emails, and it's you know, that quality and that access that you can have by using, you know, a solicitor who's not swamped and knows what they're doing. It's just invaluable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing as well is financial stability. So a lot of the bigger firms have set their business model up on doing lots of transactions at a really cheap rate.
Yeah.
And a lot of these transactions are remortgage transactions. So the remortgage market over the last 6 months has been on its knees because clients, and you'll be able to go into more detail, I'm sure, but clients have been choosing to product transfer, I think, because they have maybe borrowed a bit too much and affordability with other lenders might be difficult now. So they've chosen to stay where they are for another year, 2 years, or maybe on a tracker with no redemption penalties. They can move later. But these businesses, these conveyancing businesses, have set their model up on doing high volume. So what happens if the high volume isn't there anymore? And we've seen some really big businesses go bust already last year, but I think that's really only just the start of it. I think in 2024, we'll see the knock-on effect of their huge reduction in volumes from the tail end of last year. And we'll see more go bust, which is really sad for the staff involved, and I really feel for them. But we've got to be realistic. So many clients call me and say, "Oh, Chris, you quoted me at the beginning of the transaction. You're a little bit more expensive. I decided to go to somebody else, and we're about to exchange next week, and my law firm has gone bust, and they contact me. We can't compete." And that's a really horrible position to be in. I don't necessarily know what the solution is. You need some stability or some confidence that that firm will be there in the next 12 weeks. And if you are getting a quote from one of those firms, I don't know how you achieve that. My only advice would be you'll know the firms that might be at risk. And they're typically the firms that are paying a lot of money to be top of Google.
Yeah, no, definitely. That makes sense. Okay. Well, I mean, one other question I was going to ask you, which it kind of is on this subject, I think is quite relevant. So as opposed to coming back to it, I'll ask it now. One question I often get from clients is, why don't I just deal with the solicitor? Why are there other people involved? And sometimes, clients, I mean, I always try to make myself so available to clients. Sometimes my own detriment, because my working hours can be a bit insane sometimes. But I always like to make clear, if you need me, call me. I will return your call. I reply typically within a day, 2 days if I can, at latest. And clients are used to that access. Or with the estate agent, they've been dealing with, Bill or Ben, whoever, and they call Ben and they get hold of him. With the solicitors model, often you'll have the solicitor, but then you'll have the case handlers and then the other people involved. What's your kind of set on why that is, and in many ways a benefit to a client, but also why it's structured like that? And I know with Thomas Legal, if a client says I need to speak to, like Candice, who we work with very closely, they can get through to her, so there's not a problem there. But sometimes I think, well, why am I dealing with someone else? Why is Candice not doing everything? God bless her. Why is it set up like that?
Another good question. The traditional model, going back a long time, was that the solicitor had an assistant, and together they did everything. Yep. So if you wanted a quote from that firm, the solicitor would do it. If you were post-completion and there was a few loose ends to tie up, the solicitor would do it. And that's really good from a relationship perspective, but it's not very good from an efficiency perspective, because what you want your solicitor doing is the complex work that they're actually being paid to do. You don't want them doing admin, and you don't want them doing all the various things that can be done by someone else. Also, you don't want to be reliant on one person, because that one person could be off for a whole multitude of reasons that would mean that your transaction slows down. So the best model, I think, is that you have a specific team for new inquiries, quoting, talking through the process, answering any initial questions. I think that's really important to take that away from the solicitors themselves. Then to have two solicitors working together on every case, I think is just invaluable, because you need a solicitor in a team to check everything before it goes out, to sign everything off, to take responsibility. So if you've got two solicitors doing that on your case, then clearly if one has a 2-week holiday, the process doesn't slow down, continues at the same pace, and the levels of communication remain consistent throughout. The biggest issue in our industry is inconsistency. And what you'll find is throughout busier periods. So I think everybody's probably heard of the spring market. The spring market's really busy, typically. So if lots of people market their property in the spring and people buy them early summer, well, what happens in August? All the conveyancers are the busiest they've been throughout the year, and they all need to go on holiday. So August typically in our industry is really bad for service. If you've got two lawyers in that team, they're not off at the same time, then you don't have that issue. But no firms do that, really. We do, but no firms really do that, because it's expensive to run. But if you're offering something and you're charging properly for it and it works commercially, why aren't people doing it? I think it's important. You have the beginning part of the process. So sorry, you have the onboarding part. Then you have the bit where the files being opened, information's being gathered, all the important parts of the process to set up the case. That shouldn't be done by a solicitor, that should be done by admin. And when you have easier transactions, a lot of that can be done by a paralegal. Now, it's really important for legal assistants to do the beginning bit of the transaction. And it's really important for the paralegals to be getting exposure to more and more of the transactions it goes through, because these are our future lawyers. These, there's no risk to the client because the solicitor oversees the whole thing. The benefit to the client is the solicitor is now more available, but our legal assistants are our lawyers in 8 years' time. So they need to see it all the way through. And I just think from a service perspective, it's night and day between a model like that and a model where it's just the solicitor and a solicitor and assistant. So I think that is the answer, along with technology and all the other benefits. That model solves a lot of problems for our industry. It provides consistency, it provides a much higher level of service, and it gets us to a place where the transaction is quicker. So that has to be the way forward, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. And certainly with the work I do with Thomas Legal, it's, there is that efficiency to it. Everyone knows what they're doing and everyone's involved, and that complements itself very well. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, please ask below and hit subscribe below so you don't miss out on our next episode.